A warm welcome to our guest at today's webinar with the title From S&OP to Real-Time IBP, Knowing Sooner, Acting Faster. My name is Mark. I'm Vice President at 4Flow. I'm the head of the digital practice and responsible of major supply chain transformations. Today, we have an exciting panel discussion featuring experts with incredible experience in the field of supply chain planning. So let's do an introduction round. So Kai, I hand over to you.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Kai Althoff, CEO and co-founder of 4Flow. I work for more than 20 years now in the supply chain market. I worked in projects and transformations for all sectors, but for my whole professional life, I had a very special focus on the automotive supply chain. It's a passion of me to make cross-functional work becoming a reality. The prerequisites for that have changed tremendously over the years, not only in the outside world, but also in the inside world of the automotive industry. We see totally different requirements on the supply chain, but also different capabilities. Today, we have a much better technological basis to support our idea of cross-functional work than we ever had. For me, this webinar to really go from only an S&OP view to a real-time IBP view of the integrated business planning makes really sense. And I'm very much looking forward to spend the next hour with all of you. Thank you very much for the introduction, Mark. And I want to hand over to the next one. Dominic, take over.
Great, thanks very much, Kai. Hello, everyone. My name is Dominic Thomas, and I'm EVP of Business Consulting for Kinaxis. I have the pleasure of joining you all today from my home office here in Ottawa, Canada, where it's a very frosty minus 13 degrees Celsius today. But I've been in supply chain now for over 20 years, working with a whole plethora of different companies over that time across multiple industries. So automotive, CPG, pharmaceuticals, etc. So I'm thrilled to be here today to be part of this panel discussion, and I look forward to a very interesting discussion with you. Over to you, Fergus.
Thank you, Dom. So yeah, again, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Fergus van Niekerk and I lead the European alliances for Kinaxis. So we're working very closely with the colleagues at 4Flow. As Mark mentioned, today is a panel discussion. My role is to try and challenge Kai and Dominic with some great topical questions, which I think many of you are dealing with at the moment as we move between worlds, old world, new world, and post-COVID and so forth. So I really hope you enjoy the session and look forward to getting it going. But back to you, Mark, for a brief introduction.
Yeah, we want this to be an interactive session. So after the panel discussion, please ask your questions. You can use the chat box in your panel you see on the right-hand side on your screen. And let me make one note. From our experience, is more convenient to follow the webinar in a full screen mode, and you can switch also to the full screen mode using the panel, the control panel on your right hand. So let me give you first a short appetizer for today's session and show you a short video we have with us, which shows in 1 minute major challenges in automotive supply chain planning. So let's start this. Yes. Takes us.
The automotive industry has transformed how we commute, travel, and transport goods. Car manufacturers are innovating faster than ever before, offering more models and options. With greater choice and customization come new challenges for global supply chains. Stricter environmental regulations and penalties add pressure on companies to make sustainable choices. Changing tariffs and outsourcing result in longer lead times and more risk. There is a better way. Kinaxis gives you the agility to meet consumers' ever-changing preferences. Evaluate the impact of changes to key supply sources and find alternatives to mitigate disruptions. Meet environmental obligations and stay profitable through end-to-end supply chain visibility. Fuel your business with Kinaxis to drive new and exciting experiences for your customers.
So now I hand over to you, Fergus, and let's start with a panel discussion.
Super. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Appreciate the introduction. So let's get into it. We've got a series of questions over the next 30 odd minutes, and we'll have a poll as well during that before opening up questions for the audience. But Kai, I'm going to challenge you to the first one, and it has to be topical, unfortunately. So I talk about a time before COVID, but it's safe to say, I think, that the automotive industry was already facing key challenges prior to the beginning of 2020. So with the fundamental idea of mobility changing so fast, how do you see automotive companies tackling these challenges, and which strategies, in your opinion, afford the emergence of a new type of leader?
Yes, thank you, Fergus, for this question. It is indeed a tradition, a very good tradition of the automotive supply chain, that it is a very competitive one. And we have been used to many changes in the past as well. But today, of course, the situation is different. We have a triangle out of very big changes. We see a lot of uncertainties, and we face fragility in the automotive supply chain. So big changes, what is that today? We see changes of the entire value chain. At the foremost, we think that we have a transformation which is there from new mobility concepts, changing the world from combustion to electrical is one of the biggest we have ever seen. On the other hand, we see totally new business model in the foregoing of the digitization of the value chains. New business models emerge and request totally different supply chain models. So very big changes. I could speak another 15 minutes just about the changes we see in the business model. Uncertainties. I think COVID is just an example. We have seen trade wars between US and China, shifting total value chains from one end to the other end of the planet. Us Europeans being more on the winning than on the losing side in this part, but still a big change. We see Brexit. We have many uncertainties in the supply chain, and the biggest being maybe changing customer demands, putting new signals into the market and our supply chains every day. Fragility is maybe one of the most forgotten aspects of today's automotive supply chains. Over decades, we have now worked on optimizing our supply chains. We have supply chains which are lean in operations, lean in inventories. We have tacted supply chains which work synchronous. We have inbound concepts which are tacted to production. So these supply chains are fragile for disruptions. If something changes and is unexpected, it requires immediate attention and work from the supply chain department. So within this environment, we see that more and faster decisions on new or changed plans are much more present. We see much more of them, and they move closer from the planning horizon into execution. So we have on a daily, on a weekly basis, much more decisions of a critical impact to our competitiveness in the automotive supply chain than we have ever seen. But not only on that level, but also on strategic level. We see more decisions with a big impact than we have seen before. More what-if questions of top management have to be answered. And I think the question you put forward is just one example. So how do our supply chains cope with the transfer from a combustion into an electric powertrain world? This has to be not decided once, it has to be decided continuously, taking new aspects into account and changes within the transformation itself. Last but not least, we see currently, and we will see a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the automotive supply chain, not only on OEM side, but also on first, second, and third tier supplier. So many changes, a lot of room for perfect decision making. I think it couldn't be better for us in supply chain. We have a real impact to make on competition.
Thank you, appreciate that. And I think a couple of key points you hit on, and we'll come back to them during the rest of the presentation. But certainly the uncertainty and the dependency that a lot of the global OEMs have on their supply chain today is of course loud and clear at the moment. But yeah, some really interesting points. Dom, I'm going to just step it up and talk about maybe a little bit of the operational or the process side. So you know, you have a history of working with a number of leading automotive companies, Toyota, Yamaha, Nissan, Ford, FCA. S&OP is clearly an essential step in the process for many of these organizations. Can you talk briefly to why rapid response is such a critical platform from an automotive perspective?
Sure, thanks very much for that, Fergus. You know, there's a very famous quote attributed to Warren Buffett that goes something like this: "Only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked." And from my perspective, this past year, 2020, has presented just such a tidal event for supply chains globally across several industries. And in some cases, companies were dealing with an unprecedented surge in demand from new from new sources, new customers, new channels like Amazon. In others, it was excess inventory and manufacturing disruptions, part shortages, and severe drops in overall demand. Unfortunately for some automakers, they saw themselves in the latter group for a good part of last year. What I've observed personally in speaking with several of these companies across many different industries is that some of the old truths that we've held very near and dear to our hearts are starting to be questioned. That blinding determination for forecast accuracy and simply clicking a button to get an optimal plan is starting to get looked at a little bit more closely. I'm not making an indictment against forecast accuracy here or anything of that sort, but what I'm calling out is that there are other capabilities, like Kai mentioned, like agility and resiliency in the supply chain, that should have equal room at the table to really complete the menu. So with that background, answering the question, what makes rapid response so special? I think there are really two core components to building a foundation of that accuracy, resiliency, and agility in the supply chain system of record. The first we call concurrency. It's a word that we at Kinaxis tend to take for granted, to be honest. Concurrency for you, though, will represent a significant breakthrough in how you solve your supply chain problems. It's a technique that Kinaxis invented, and what it does is connects demand, supply, and inventory inextricably. So with rapid response, it's actually impossible to not know the impact of a change in either supply or demand or inventory, and also the connected financial impacts of the entire network when things happen. So if you put that in the perspective of S&OP, what we're really talking about here is not having to wait till week 3 after the demand review and the supply review are completed to know what the disconnects are. You would know that instantly, and that's really what concurrency gives you. So think about a situation, for instance, in the automotive world. A supplier is late with a shipment of sunroofs. Rapid response will take that information, instantly connect the dots, and tell you which final assembly factories are impacted, specifically which lines on those factories are going to have a slowdown as a result of the part shortage, and ultimately which dealerships are going to have delays in their receipt of finished vehicles. So all of that connection is happening essentially in real time from an end-to-end perspective. And that's really what we call concurrency. The next, if COVID and some of those other disruptions that Kai mentioned, like Brexit and tariff wars and things, have taught us anything, it's the need for scenario planning. Scenario planning is essentially critical to being able to allowing your planners to be able to walk into a meeting with multiple options to resolve a certain situation that's arisen. And for you as a decision maker within an organization to not have to wait weeks or days to understand the financial implications of a decision that you're about to approve. So having all of that connection in one place is really, Fergus, I think, what makes rapid response special. And that's what our customers across automotive and other industries are experiencing every day. So the bottom line is it's a true understanding of the financial implications of any decision that you make with a high level of fidelity to what's actually happening in the environment at that point in time.
No, fantastic, thank you, and I appreciate the humor there as well. It's a great quote from Warren Buffett, and it reminds me of an equally good quote from Steve Jobs, which is, I guess, he made a really good point about saying you can join the dots when you look back very easily, but looking forward, it's really hard to join the dots. And if I think about the S&OP process today, that's really about trying to join the dots looking forward, right? And part of that change and that agility for new organizations is founded in the ability to run those kind of scenarios and ask those what if questions. And to Kai's point earlier about change and uncertainty is to try and get in front of that. So appreciate that, Dom. That was great. Kai, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to come back, I guess, a little bit to change again. You have as Mark introduced you, have a lot of experience as a CEO of 4Flow, and a lot of years advising automotive supply chains. Do you see that the challenges that we witnessed prior to COVID have changed, or is it just that they've been amplified and that they're now maybe more present in the minds of the boardroom and the executive team? If I think of some examples of that, as we went through the early phases of COVID, there were many tier 2, tier 3 suppliers in Asia Pacific, for example, that were just literally knocked out, right? And that has a huge impact on volatility. But how do you view those challenges today?
Yes, thank you for this one, Fergus. We as a supply chain optimization firm, but not being an incumbent in the automotive industry, so facing the challenges every day ourselves. 2 months ago, I experienced a very interesting situation. I had a call with a COO of one of our long-term clients. He's a COO of a big automotive supplier. And I wanted to discuss with him a major transformation project. And as we all know, it's a European company. As we all know, at that point in time, we were already facing lockdown number 2, and it were not so clear times for me, I must say. And I asked him a little bit more humble than confident, hey, how is the situation for you at the moment? Is it even a good situation to talk about what we were aiming for? What do you think? Should we postpone our call? And his answer was, listen, Kai, the last 5 years, I cannot tell you any point in time where we had no crisis in our supply chains. And I was really a little bit surprised by this clear view. I had the same feeling. but you know, a little bit from outside, you make up your own pictures sometimes, and you think you know what the story is, but if you're inside, it's different. And for me, this answer was so clear. So no, it's not about COVID at all. COVID is just putting us maybe in the position to have a different perspective on it. But still, what's new? New is the speed and pressure of change. So we hit with this permanent crisis situation a framework of speed of change where we basically have no fundamentals anymore, which stay the same. So we have everything moving at the same time. And within that environment, we have to make more and more decisions for not our present, but the future. So, and there it's getting interesting. So this is really new in the extent we are seeing it at the moment and the dimensions. We need new processes. We finally have to think cross-functional here. We have to act within holistic models of the supply chain. So if we see a change of demand on our client side, or if we see a change on the supply side, maybe a shortage in these days, for example, electronic supplies, then the question is, what does the change we see today in 4 weeks, in 2 months, leaves us with? What are the possibilities to react on that? What are alternative scenarios to our current plan we have? And these current scenarios in today's world are worked on with an approach on we are happy if we generate a new feasible plan. But with the impact, these ubiquitous speed of change we have in all dimensions, that's not enough anymore, because we have no base scenario anymore we can act on and where we know it will be profitable. So we generate new corporate scenarios every day. And with that, the ambition has to be different. We have to make not only feasible scenarios and plans, we have to evaluate financially and operationally sound scenarios to derive the next good plan we want to execute on. So the solution here is first to build realistic models of the supply chain structure, operations, and financials. And second, to build up the capability to apply this model in different supply chain scenarios for the future, concurrently for the OEM, the key internal resources and internal suppliers, and the key external suppliers. Concurrently, right. Because we don't have anymore 3 or 4 weeks, as Dominic pointed out, to generate one feasible new plan. We have to evaluate concurrently within a much shorter time frame, dozens of scenarios to come up with something which leaves us in competition after the change.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And I think it's, I mean, the rate and the pace of change is just, none of us have witnessed this speed and this velocity before, right? And I think, you know, we're moving the conversation, which is where I really want to steer it to, into this integrated, more holistic view and this IBP view, right? And I want to touch now or move to the cost element of things, because it's, you know, automotive companies, you know, are burdened often with huge costs, and that all features and factors into part of the decision-making cycle. So I remember very clearly growing up, my mother in all of her infinite wisdom, she always said you can spend, you know, £1, €1, $1 just once, right? And I think we laugh about this sometimes, but it's as true for individuals as it is for companies. So I guess automotive companies have to be very specific about how they manage their costs in the short term, the midterm, to secure their future. Kai, it's a question to you, but do when you look at the costly COVID crisis, for example, and money in the placement of it, it becomes even more important. So if we address the critical question here is how best to manage cost with everything that's going on. You know, will automotive supply chains look differently in the future, or you know, how do you see that shaping up? I mean, it's, of course, we see the split now in terms of production between EV and combustion, but there's a huge burden. There's an operational cost associated with that. So how do these large OEMs manage that better?
Yes, thank you, Fergus. One thing is for sure, it will look different out there in the future. I spoke about the speed of change just a minute ago. And how will it look? I think the best answer is we don't know. I think the most important question to ask is, how can we proactively manage the changes on a strategic, tactical, and daily level? Because there will be no way of us foreseeing what will happen in the next 5 years anymore. Was there any way? I don't know if there was one. So I spoke earlier about holistic models and scenario capabilities. Sometimes sounds a bit theoretic as well, but I think by the end of the day, that's it. And speaking now about best practice, the challenge really is to shift from a reactive to a proactive approach in the supply chain. This is the process by the end of the day to actively identify realistic future scenarios. So, for example, actively looking on the demand side, looking into the next weeks and months, identifying shifts in model mix. If we want shift between the share of combustion and electric powertrains, of maybe cars produced on the same assembly line, and then identifying realistic scenarios, taking them into our holistic models and evaluate them. Evaluate these scenarios both in a supply chain planning and in a financial planning way at the same time. So what is the best way to react on a bigger share than expected even in electric powertrain? What is the most profitable way to react on it, and what is the most operative desired way in terms of supply chain planning? What is the new model mix we will produce and source from our suppliers and feed just in sequence into the new production sequence we generate by the end of the day? The conclusion is that the best practice is a cross-functional approach. So we have to finally tear down the barriers between the functions within the supply chain and take a process view. Cross-functional operating models will definitely be the future of a successful supply chain planning environment. And this is not only a process, a huge requirement on IT technologies, which we have to fulfill and which we can fulfill today, but also it is the emergence of a new job profile. People managing future supply chains will be much more analytical and much broader in their view they have to take than they have ever been before. And also there, we have to include this into our transformations we are driving, maybe sometimes by far too much from a technological and an organizational standpoint of view. And don't forget the people and skills we need to drive these future scenarios.
Thank you, Kai. I should have started off by saying maybe a two-part question, because Dom, I want to really bring you into that as well, in the sense that, you know, Kai's touched now on operational model and change there. From your perspective and thinking about rapid response as a platform. How does it support better decision making, better cost control, and how do you see that financial impact made visible?
Yeah, well, that Kai's answer just now sets this up perfectly, right? Because all of those what is the most type questions that Kai just went through are answered by rapid response using what we call our scorecarding and dashboarding capability. And rapid response does a wonderful job of connecting the KPIs to all of these different scenarios that you could test out in answering those questions. And these KPIs are both financial and operational. So things like margin and COGS and spend balanced out against inventory turns and average inventory and excess inventory. All of that type of modeling is really presented to the planner, to the executive decision maker. And what really sets this apart from sort of traditionally how supply chains have operated is that this is forward-looking based on future scenarios. It's not looking in your rear view mirror and saying, this is what happened last month or last week or last quarter. It's projecting going forward in time. And so any KPI essentially can be modeled using these scorecards or dashboards in rapid response. And moreover, all of these KPIs are configurable. So what we're looking to do is actually match the calculation that particular organization uses. So now people from finance can be involved in this IBP process to actually make financial-based decisions. So when Kai says, what is the best course forward? Well, best would imply a financial aspect to it in terms of making a decision that weighs off or balances out the priority that maybe supply chain wants to put in place versus the financial side, the CFO's office being involved in helping shape that decision. And you need information, you need data and metrics to be able to do that. So, you're answering questions like, all of us sitting together right now in a room and Fergus, let's say you pose a question like, well, what if our demand returns to normal volumes as we emerge from COVID in June or in September or in December? That to us on the rapid response side is really three scenarios that a planner can create very quickly, a couple of seconds to have the framework for that scenario, change whatever inputs you need to, so demand coming back in June or in August or in December, and then instantly knowing what that means based on, let's say, the 8 KPIs that the CFO's office needs to evaluate in order to approve a decision, right? So having that cross-functional collaboration, I think, is really critical so that supply chain, the left hand, truly knows what the right hand is doing and vice versa. So, that is reality in today's world. That is reality going forward, right? Having the ability to evaluate these different options and presenting really a truly integrated business plan to get better value. So you're not expediting freight, for instance, just to satisfy a safety stock that would ordinarily have returned back to normal next week if you had just left it the way it was going to happen. And truly expediting freight for when your factory is going to shut down because you're going to be missing a key component, for instance. So that's my take on how rapid response offers that better transparency across the board as part of the IBP process.
Great. Thank you, Dom. And again, a number of times the phrase cross-functional teams has come up, and Kai, you spoke about the shift from reactive to proactive, and we're starting to get a sense of a picture for this real cross-functional team of finance and supply chain working. But Kai, from your perspective, is there a best practice process out there that you can share with the audience that really evolves that? Because I sense that a number of people in the audience probably identify the need for more agility and the desire for more agility, but possibly struggle with the how, right? And how do we get there?
Yeah, I think this is a very important question. And first, I would like to put the needed change in a nutshell again. So we have to make faster decisions with a much better quality than before. So we need to act on holistic models, taking supply chain KPIs in account, and at the same time we take financial KPIs into account. Second, we have to work in cross-functional teams to make that happen, the right people in the right process. Third, we have to get ready our scenario planning capability, process, and technology. So all nicely said, what to be taken of it, how do I get there? And by the end of the day, probably most attendees have done similar or alike projects. And I have just today my focus on one pre-recommendation, really one most important recommendation. And that is, in the past, change processes very often first set up a new process world, aligning then new organization and IT to that new process idea, and implementing a pilot, doing a rollout, and being done with a change just after 36 months. This is not how a successful change will look like in today's environment. We can only be successful if we change that approach in an approach where we simultaneously change process, respective organization, and IT. So we have to do it at the same time. Of course, that is one of the key elements of agile thinking, of an agile project, but it's difficult. We have not learned that in the past. But what makes it possible today as well is there is IT, there is technology. We need to do that off the shelf in the market where we can do it simultaneously, because we don't need long customization projects anymore. We don't have to do try and error on these things. We can do it simultaneously and achieve results in a much faster and parallel way. So my key recommendation would be, rethink your change strategy. Make it one where you attack process and IT at the same time.
No, fantastic, thank you. And I guess again, there's that old saying of, if you're not changing, you're standing still, right? So yeah, rethinking your change strategy is probably one of the very clear takeaways from that. And as you say, speed, cross-functional silos, and the ability to scenario plan or make assumptive plans from a finance perspective. Fantastic, thank you both. We're going to go into a quick poll, which I'm going to hand back to you, Mark, and then we'll finish off with just a few more questions. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Fergus. Dear audience, now we would like to encourage you to actively participate in today's session. We have prepared 2 questions for you. I will show you. Give me a second. I'm choosing, and now you should see the question. For many, the monthly S&OP meeting has simply become a show and tell. How do we progress beyond this? So you can now select between 3 answers. A, have more meaningful executive alignment, or do you think drive quicker decision-making through better scenario modeling, or do you think by better integration of financial elements, allowing supply chains to become fully transparent? So please vote. I see votes coming in. Yes. I wait still some seconds before I close. Yeah, so we have still a 50-50. Yes. Now I close. Now I have to push the share. So I see, yes, your selection was the majority said drive quicker decision making by better scenario modeling. So thanks for that. Let's come to the next question I share now. It's also an interesting question about the need of supply chain talent. We already discussed. So now you should see the question, and the question is, sourcing the right talent is one of the biggest challenges in supply chain right now. What skills become the most essential in order to compete? So please select, you can select between between either end-to-end holistic process understanding or technical planning, system understanding, or analytic and evaluation skills, or communication and collaboration skills. So I see votes coming in. Now it's, I think I wait still a little bit. It's interesting. I think we have two favorites. I still wait maybe for one vote. Yes, let's close the poll, and the majority said voted for technical and planning. System understanding is mostly needed to be successful. So thanks for your participation, and then we continue in the third and last round in our panel discussion. So over to you, Fergus.
Thank you, Mark. Interesting set of answers there, and I think we'll probably touch on a few of them as we get into the final 10 minutes or so. So just very quickly, we've got about 8 minutes left before we open up to a few questions for the audience. So I really want to touch on some of the specifics of the automotive planning challenges and how to tackle this in the S&OP process. But you know, as we've suggested during this discussion, the automotive sector is facing significant challenges ahead of it. Yeah, grappling with e-mobility, and Kai, you mentioned fragility and uncertainty of demand and change in buyer behaviors. And you know, of course, if you're in Europe right now, then the CO2 emissions become a very big factor as well for automotive OEMs. And likewise, legislation and governance, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on, right? So, Kai, question to you: if we think about you know, working in the old automotive world versus the new one, clearly there's a lot of change and a lot of challenge ahead. But you know, I'd say safe to say a lot of the organizations today perhaps run on an older principle and process, right? And that has to change, as we've discussed, to deal with things. But you know, producing the combustion engine and ramping up new electric vehicles at the same time is you know, with cost and resource constraints, is not a task for the faint-hearted at all. Certainly one that I'm not envious of. But can you give your top 2 or 3 ideas on how best to address this, and you know, and can advanced planning systems really help support the more informed and better management of costs here?
Fergus, yes, of course. I think it's even needed to really answer very clearly on this question. So what is the main competitor of a company like Kinaxis in the automotive world? And it is indeed Microsoft. So it is Excel and Access, and that is how a lot of the planning tasks are still supported. But Excel and Access cannot cope with the challenges anymore we have discussed in this meeting. We really see limits there, and I think there's nobody who would disagree. It's a little bit more about the availability and trust that advanced planning systems could really do their jobs. And there are quite a big number of people out there who maybe have been involved in the first advanced planning system wave we have seen 20 years ago, and there we saw real cross-functional work was not possible with those systems on the one hand, and neither with the data structure lying under those systems. So we have already said a lot about the model and being proactive, and this of course requires a new thinking also in the systems we have to invest in. The idea today is definitely the guiding idea is definitely to build a digital twin of the supply chain. So that is where we want to go. And digital twin involves not only advanced planning and supply chain planning system, but of course also data structures. And rapid response is a possibility, a very advanced possibility and key component of such a digital twin, and the possibility to integrate all we have said so far about the model and being proactive into the future processes of a supply chain. So integrate a component like rapid response from Kinaxis into the overall IT landscape, and having it thereby fed with all the current data at any time is the way to go, and is definitely worth the investment. And what we should never forget is do the same with process, people, and skills, and then we will get the show going.
Yeah, fantastic, and that's critical. The people, the process, and the skills element. Gentlemen, there's two questions left before we, as I said, open it up to the audience. And Kai, I want a summary answer from you on this one, if we can. So, you know, we've spoken about fragility and complexity, or certainly you've mentioned it today, and we've probably touched on this as well during the presentation. But as a key takeaway, can you give us one statement, one starting point that will help the audience really leave this webinar and think about how best to shift to a new, more pragmatic, less complex, more agile way of working that has, you know, the magical big impact on the P&L. I know it's again, I'm asking you the really tricky big questions, but where's the one place that you start?
I think the key is the guiding picture, and the guiding picture is, from my point of view, very easy to put in a nutshell. The key is to increase the speed in communication, analytics, and decisions, and to do that on a new qualitative level and change the perspective of the whole process and organization in a process-oriented perspective, cross-functional work, and this should be the picture guiding all our changes in process, organization, and IT.
Yeah, fantastic. I like that, the guiding picture. Thank you. So Dom, before we open up to the audience, final question to you, and a little bit of a leading question in the sense that, you know, part of this webinar series that Mark spoke about will touch specifically on CO2, but you know, clearly European OEMs in particular face huge costs as they seek to manage and reduce, you know, emissions. I think it's reasonable to assume that a lot of e-cars and hydrogen cars will continue to hit the market over the next, you know, 2 to 3 years. But perhaps what we don't discuss often is how CO2 emissions have to be part of the supply chain decision making at both the strategic and tactical level. It's one thing to set the agenda, you know, at a political level, but for that to really transfer down to the tactical. So can you talk a little bit about your experience in this and how, again, rapid response might support this initiative?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question. It's one, Fergus, that's quite near and dear to my heart. These days, I think it's practically impossible to pick up an annual report and not read something about the CEO's vision to address climate change, recycling practices, and greenhouse gases in general. So we on the supply chain side have been for so many years very focused on the bottom line and extracting every ounce of cost out of production and purchasing and so on. But what I've been learning from these companies that we work with is that increasingly they're realizing that there are other factors that need to be balanced out as well in making these decisions at an IBP level or S&OP executive decision making. You know, consumer tastes are changing, and we're all getting more aware of sustainability-based manufacturing practices. So from a decision-making perspective, perhaps it's no longer just the cheapest cost that overrules all other considerations when deciding which upstream supplier to choose or where manufacturing should be done globally. Now, going back to my prior response on scorecarding and dashboards, in rapid response, we've basically added several KPIs to track greenhouse gas emissions and other factors like recycled plastics content in a bill of materials, as an example. Water usage in terms of the manufacturing process. These are all configurable KPIs for us that can be shown for each different planning scenario that you might be evaluating as part of your IBP process, and factor that into the prescribed plan that rapid response would actually recommend to move forward with. So I think constantly testing assumptions with a full understanding, so that is the financial impact, the operational impact, impact from these other factors like CO2 as an example, is really critical, I think, in that next generation of planning systems of record.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, sustainability, as you say, is critical. So thank you for that. Okay, that concludes the direct questions from my side. I think we've got a couple coming in online. We've got about 5 minutes left. So let me read this one out, which is coming from the audience. So let's start with the question to you both, but maybe Dom, we start with you. So is there merit in development of new technology solutions and processes belonging to small, high functioning, high performance product teams rather than central IT departments?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. You know, it sort of goes back to a point Kai had mentioned earlier about how Excel and Access ends up becoming kind of these go-to technologies. And if you think about, and I've read a little bit of the literature around how an Excel workbook comes into being. And it's mainly because in most organizations, you know, you've got planners who are very skilled individuals who have a problem that they need to solve. And maybe the traditional sort of tools that they have require IT to configure, to adapt, to make a new enhancement. Well, IT, as we know in most organizations, are notoriously backlogged. And so the request from the business gets put in a queue and it'll get dealt with in priority. Well, the planner still needs a problem solved. And so we'll go off and build a spreadsheet. And now 3 months later, we've been using that spreadsheet and the team knows about it and so on. And IT comes back with, okay, that request that you asked me for 3 or 4 months ago, I've put it into the system now. And now that would require somebody to just say, okay, well, what we've been doing the last 4 months that everybody has sort of coalesced around is no longer what we're going to do. We're going to shift again. And that just doesn't happen, right? So that's how a spreadsheet process tends to get birthed, if you will. So putting in the configurability and having a COE, for example, on the business side with skilled users who can do their own configurations and put in the business logic that, you know, all of these organizations are constantly responding to new practices and things. And having that configuration in the system that it doesn't rely on IT to have to do, that I think gives you a lot of efficiency. And then the last point on that is having that configuration be upgradable. So it's not a situation where you're now stuck. You've done some some customization. So we use the term configurability versus customization, and the difference there is customization tends to restrict you from being able to upgrade. It becomes a massive effort. Configuration means that you can actually move it from one version to the next. And I think that's the essence of this question, and that's really what we look to put in place with rapid response.
Super, thank you. Kai, you have a view on that quickly?
Yeah, I think we have to do both. Usually for the data structures, we need central IT without any question. But developing the right process-aligned configuration of the actual application is clearly a decentral and small team approach, which should have a very agile characteristic.
Fantastic. Good. Thank you. And we may have just a couple of seconds for the final question, Kai. It's coming. What is your view? What is your view on centralized versus decentralized planning? Does one afford more advantages over the other? Big question. About a minute. Can you do it?
It's a question of what you are planning. That's quite easy. You know, decentral is always more flexible. Central, you take more holistic considerations. There's not a bad or good. There's a suited and non-suited. So if you have a global production network with resources and capacities you can interchange, then you might go for a central program and production planning approach. If those plans are fed by local and regional supply structures, then those planning tasks cross-functionally between production and the suppliers might then end up to being very decentral and executed in the region. So from my point of view, to be as close as possible to reality is really key, because otherwise we will not generate the speed we have spoken about in the very beginning of this webinar. So get as close as possible to the reality and to where things happen is, I think, a driving thought here, definitely.
Fantastic. Thank you. And with that, I want to thank you both. Appreciate it. I appreciate the dialogue, the discussion, and your view on how we're moving this forward. So thank you both. And Mark, thank you as well to you.
Okay, so thanks a lot, and then thanks to the audience to be part of the webinar, and hopefully see you quite soon in the next webinar of our series. So bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
It was a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai.